Hello and welcome back to the Cottage Tactico on YouTube. I'm Kish and it's great to be back with you all for another video. I'm trying to basically do this as live, so you've got a quick eve of game tactical preview to enjoy. Maybe it's something you can watch headed up on the train to Manchester like I will be tomorrow for what is a massive cup tie against Man United. I've called this one Revenge at United because even though Marco is playing it down, this game really brings back memories of the last time we played them away in the cup. It all started so well. Harrison Reed in particular was at his terrier-like best, if I recall correctly. And then it just went so badly wrong, didn't it? Definitely Chris Kavanagh's fault. Maybe Willian's fault. Definitely Alexander Mitrovic's fault as well. And just the picture brings back the pain, doesn't it, guys? And maybe there's an element of revenge we can get tomorrow. Not for Mitro. He's gone. Maybe Willian could do it off the bench. That would feel quite poetic. Marco's still there. And you just know that he really wants to get a win in this one. Not just because of what happened last time, but because Fulham have a real chance of going far in the Cup this year. So I'm going to try and give you a quick tactical preview of United versus Fulham. I'm not going to get too into it, but I do want to focus on shape in different phases, what that might mean for the game and the sort of patterns of play that we see, and consequently what it might mean for selection, because there are some really interesting things to work out, particularly from the Fulham side of things ahead of this game. So without further ado, let's get into it. The big question for Fulham headed into this one is 4 at the back versus 5 at the back, because we deployed that 5 at the back system we've seen a bit sometimes this season against Wolves in midweek to really good effect. And it's raised that whole question again, whether Marco reverts back to it for this one or goes back to plan A. And I think really this slightly depends on how you view this match and how much you think you should take into account the opposition, or if you just think United are pretty rubbish and we should go with plan A. So let's think a little bit more about what Fulham should do as we go along. For now, I've got us in our sort of standard 4-3-3 kind of shape. You can see I've actually got Andreas Pereira in for Emil Smith-Rowe just because of that knock. I'm not sure how match fit he'll be, and it might be a decent enough excuse to get Andreas back into the side. That could be either way. It's not going to really make much difference to the tactical analysis we put forward here. I've got Anderson in over Issa Diop, which is harsh, but hold the thought. We might see if there's reason for Diop to come back into the side as we go along. What's actually more striking in this one is just how few options United have. So here I have them in their 5-2-3, the shape that Ruben Amorim tends to really insist on. And you can see that they're pretty threadbare. There's not a lot off the bench that could change this. So obviously in this 5-2-3 shape, width really importantly comes from the wing backs, and Dorgu, their new left back / right back, can go on either side, but he's crucially left-footed, is suspended. And that's a really big loss for them. It means that both of the wing backs in this system are basically full-backs. They're not really that attacking, and neither of them have a left foot. And that's going to have an impact on what we try and suggest might be the pattern of this game. Similarly, at the back, no Lisandro Martinez. Some Fulham fans quite happy about that after his antics at the Cottage before he got that winning goal. I think it's kind of a shame. I'd quite like to see the next bit of the saga between him and Adama in this one. But it is a real blow for them. He's their only really left-footed centre-half. He's the only one who's that comfortable on the ball in sort of a more dynamic way than some of the sort of bigger centre-halves they have. What it means is that they almost certainly will be playing De Ligt, Maguire and Lenny Yoro in some sort of combination. I think this is probably the most likely 3 that we see, with De Ligt on the right, Yoro on the left. But as I said, none of them left-footed. And that could be a factor, again, as we go through what might happen in this one. Ahead of that back 5, midfield pivot, Ugarte, their sort of tackler in midfield. I've got Bruno Fernandes next to him. They've looked a lot better in general with Fernandes deeper and getting on the ball earlier. So he's tended to play in this double pivot, and that puts a bit of pressure on them out of possession. It means Bruno has to do quite a lot of work. It means Ugarte has to cover a lot of ground, and this 2 in general have to cover a lot of ground. The midfield 2 tends to have a lot of work to do because ahead of them they have essentially 3 attackers. And crucially, again, another injury, another thing that you might think makes Fulham's chances in this game better than they otherwise would be. No Amad Diallo, and he's been really good out on that right side. So Garnacho, Højlund, Xerxes, the front 3, they're basically the only senior front 3 they could field. And, that has meant they've had to adjust a little bit how they'd normally play. There are some options, I guess, for things that they could do to switch things up. So, for example, you could see someone like Casemiro come in who's looked pretty dreadful, to be honest, at times, but he is a senior midfield player. He could come and slot in next to Manuel Ugarte, and you could push Bruno Fernandes up a little bit. That is possible, gives them a bit more solidity, allegedly, and is a bit more conservative, gets Bruno higher up the pitch. But if I'm being really honest, I think it's much more likely we're going to see what we had to start with, which is that starting lineup with Xerxes dropping off. And then Alejandro Garnacho is an interesting one. Obviously, he's been in a bit of hot water this week. He's had to buy his teammates dinner. But he's a good player, and he sort of changes the dynamics of this United team. So what Ruben Amorim really wants is he wants his two support strikers or attackers or number 10s to get inside in the pockets and play off a big striker. He wants them to be fairly narrow. He wants them to sort of operate in these sort of half spaces. That's really not Alejandro Garnacho's game. So when he tends to play for United, you'll see him sort of take up really wide positions here. Obviously, he'll cut inside. He'll still be a threat coming in to the box. But by playing that wide, what it does is it opens up this space that you can see here. And that space can be filled by someone like Bruno Fernandes pushing on. That does leave them a little bit exposed in rest defence. Come back to that again. But it also means that you could get an underlapping fullback. So you could see someone like Dalot or Mazraoui. They could play on either side, to be honest, filling that space. And it's sort of that left-hand side and the dynamics of the left-hand side that I want to talk about a little bit when it comes to what Fulham are doing both on and off the ball. And thankfully, we had a bit of an example of this when we played them at the Cottage. Garnacho did play, and I can show you what that looks like just now. So you can see the average position map, the pass map from the game at the Cottage. Very forgettable game, best not thought about too much, to be honest, but it does give us a bit of a clue as to how the sides might operate this time, given Amorim was in place, we saw his system, and crucially, Alejandro Garnacho is playing. And this was actually the first time you saw Amorim start to slightly tweak his system. He'd been quite dogmatic about it. He still is in many ways. But Garnacho, as you can see here, holding width high and wide on the left. Mazraoui underlapping, supported by Lisandro Martinez, and they've also got Bruno Fernandes over that side. And that sort of overloaded left-hand side was the only real bit of excitement from United in this game. Look, they didn't create an awful lot, did they? But they did get their goal, and it did come after some play down this left-hand side, and actually it was obviously Martinez who puts it in. Luckily, he won't be able to do that in this one. But it gives you an idea to those dynamics and how, you know, the arrival of Alejandro Garnacho allows for sort of this underlapping run, and it causes some problems for the defence, and we'll look at that in a bit more detail in a second. Crucially though, on the right hand side here, they did have Diallo, who can hold some width and can keep defences honest. They're going to lack that width in this game, so if they do overload this left hand side, they have no Diallo, and they look quite different without him. So for example, I'm going to show you the average positions from their last game, bizarre game against Ipswich. I'll give you a couple of caveats here. First of all, I wouldn't pay too much attention to where Diogo Dalot is. He switches sides basically after Dorgu here gets sent off. So he goes from right wing back to left wing back, and he ends up sort of averaged out as in the middle. He was sort of, imagine him over here most of the time in their setup. But the player that I do want you to look at is Joshua Zirkzee. So Zirkzee is essentially central. He has license to go left and right and drop off. So he plays a bit like a number 10, but he's not holding width. So if you have this dynamic where Garnacho is going to hold width, where you're going to have underlapping runs from a fullback supported by a slightly more aggressive centre-half, and with your more creative central midfield player over on that side, you've overloaded this side, sure, but there's almost nothing keeping you honest down this side. So Fulham, when they approach this game, have got to think about, well, who's going to look after Garnacho? Who are we going to bring across in terms of numbers that we can trust to get enough numbers around here to not just get overloaded? And then how do we get at the other side really effectively? Because if they're going to overload in this way, it won't be as dramatic as this. This is a bit exaggerated because obviously they had a man sent off, but it is a dynamic for that side because Bruno is on that side and he's a ball magnet. If that left-hand side is where they're going to focus, how do we try and get into them and cause them some problems knowing that's what their setup will be? So let's go back to the board and I can show you a bit of how it might play out. Okay, so back on the board, and you can see that we've got United sort of set up a bit more in what I assume will be their in possession shape, Garnacho holding width. And you can see immediately the sort of conundrum it poses us, right? Which is that overwhelmingly you feel like the man you want to look after Alejandro Garnacho is Timothy Castagna. You don't really want a big centre half coming out to deal with him. That doesn't really make sense. He's probably the most natural person to do that, so he's going to be dragged really wide. And then if you look at Fulham's out of possession shape, we're in sort of a 4-4-2. Berger to the left, Lukic dropping back from the right, Andreas pressing a bit more with Raul, and then the wingers coming inside a bit. That's the shape that we like to play. Now, obviously, our central defensive midfield player is over on this side. He's on the left-hand side, so he can maybe help a bit on Joshua Zirkzee, although I think actually if Zirkzee drops deep, Bassi is the perfect person to go and bully him and deal with that. So Berger sort of is caught between two things. He could come all the way across to try and deal with Bruno, but that takes us out of shape a little bit, pulls us around a bit. It's an option. It could happen. More likely, I think, is that we think Sasha Lukic picks up Bruno Fernandes and does a bit of a job going back and forth with him. Now, if that's the case, when this run comes from Diogo Dalot, and look, his final product's not brilliant, but he's a pretty willing runner. It could be Mazraoui, like I said, but when he starts making that run, who do you want coming back deep and inside? Is it really Adama Traore? I'm not sure that's the most sensible thing in the world, really. I don't think that really suits him. And then you get this situation where if for whatever reason these guys force us to switch, do you want Adama having to do the defensive duty of picking up Garnacho? Does he have the discipline to do that? I don't think that really makes sense. So this is where I think Fulham have got an issue. And there are a couple of ways that they could try and solve that issue that we can have a chat about. So we spoke a bit earlier about Issa Diop, and Fulham could look to go 5 at the back and match United up. And what this does is you bring in someone like Diop. Let's take out Andreas Pereira maybe. So off you go. Sorry, Andreas. And then we can have sort of like Adama and Iwobi inside supporting Raul. And we've got this sort of like 5-2-3 shape. We match up United really well. What does this allow us to do? Well, it means that you've got a couple of options. So one, like Lukic can come out here and push wide and pick up the run of Dalot, and then Diop can do that thing where he really aggressively jumps out with Bruno in the same way he did Mateus Cunha. Similarly, every now and then you might find that actually Castagna picks up the run of Dalot and Diop has to deal with sort of outside defending. And look, Diop is better at that. He's more aggressive in the channels. They say someone like Joachim Andersen. If Andersen's having to come across here and deal with players, we've probably made a mistake. So look, out of possession, I can sort of see the justification for doing this, but it does beg the question, which is that United are sort of rubbish and they leave all kinds of space. I talked about that rest defence earlier, where they basically just leave like Ugarte dealing with in front of the back three, and like none of this back three are very quick. And do you really want to give up an extra attacking option to deal with a minor problem in how this lines up? And sort of, yeah, is that really the most sensible way to go? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that makes a big enough difference to justify the sort of the lack of attacking impetus you get from taking out one of your attacking players. The other thing to point out is that Berger and Lukic are an amazing pivot, but even the pair of them against Wolves found themselves getting overrun a bit when Wolves loaded more men into the centre of the park. They were very much on their own. It's the dynamic that Bruno and Ugarte have that I really dislike, actually. You end up with these two having to do a huge amount of work, and you sometimes lose control of the ball without one extra central midfield player. So I'm not sure going 5 at the back really is the one for this one. So look, you can have an argument as to whether it should be Issa Diop or whether it should be Joachim Andersen, but I'm going to take Diop out of the starting lineup for now. So if I can just work my actual tactics board, off you go, Issa, and let's bring Andreas back into the 10. So we're going to go back to what looks more like a 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1 kind of shape. Still got this problem though, which is Adama tracking back. It does feel like too much responsibility for him. And look, maybe you can just trust him, but I actually think there's another thing we can do. It's a tweak. It's still 4 at the back, but it's shades of Man City away. It's shades of Bobby Decordova-Reid. What if you just flip the wingers? What if you just take Adama Traore and bring him over onto the left-hand side, and you bring Alex Iwobi over onto the right-hand side? And remember that Iwobi has the ability to sort of drop in as a situational wing back at times. So you can have, if we shuffle again, you can have sort of Castagna coming inside where necessary. So when Garnacho drives him inside and Dalot overlaps, you can then have Iwobi there. Or if Dalot comes inside as a pseudo midfield player, you can have Iwobi in there. Like, he's quite defensively sound. He's done this before. Alex Iwobi is probably more than capable of playing that role. And this also then has some impacts going the other way, which might be quite desirable. And interesting, we actually saw a brief glimmer of this from Marco in the fixture against United at the Cottage. So I'm going to show you a couple of screen grabs that show you how this dynamic plays out. So here we are, in-game screen grab of our game against United at the Cottage. And what I try to show you here is the fact that Fulham have packed 8 outfield players onto the right-hand side of the pitch. They've overloaded the right. And the key man, number 4 on the screen grab, is Alex Iwobi. Iwobi's out on the right. And Fulham have decided to get numbers around him. So you can see Raul's pulled out that side. Sasha Lukic is there. We've got Castagna and Anderson playing down that side as well. And these are sort of Fulham players who are quite comfortable in tight space. Anderson's probably a better ball playing right hand side. And this tilted build-up really suits those players. It gets them in close proximity. And also, crucially, it targets the side of the United midfield that are less defensively sound. We just said that Bruno Fernandes is essentially playing as a left pivot for them in this system. This gives him lots and lots of numbers around him and forces him to run around a fair bit and do some work. So Fulham start playing in the second half, I think this was, of the game at the Cottage, down the right in early phases quite a lot. And they use Alex Iwobi and his playmaking skills as sort of a ball magnet to allow them to do this. Something we did a lot the season before. I always talk about it. I think our best performance last year by quite a way was Spurs at home. This is the way we played then. Iwobi on the right, sort of conducting play. And the thing about this is that by bringing all those players in close proximity on the right-hand side, you also then have something interesting to look at on the left, which is what I can show you next. When you overload one side, when you come over the other side, you tend to have more space and a less settled defence to attack. And let's have a look at what the left-hand side of Fulham's lineup looked like when they started playing down the right with Iwobi against United. Look at the two players you have here. Adama Traore, Anthony Robinson on the same side, sort of alternating between who holds width and who surges into the half space. But if you're going to try and get 2 players running at a defence on one side, Jedi and Adama are about as exciting a 2 as you could get. And look, I'm not just saying this because Adama was suddenly class playing off the left, almost like a number 10 against Wolves. I think that this combo is particularly dangerous when you consider who they're going up against and who they could potentially run at from the United side of things. So it's quite a tantalising prospect. I'm not sure if we'll see it from the start, but I think it's something that should definitely be an option for us at some point during this game. We're going to go back to the board and I'm going to show you the kind of opportunities this could potentially open up for us. So immediately when we translate what we've just seen back into the board, you can see that this causes some problems for United. So what I've tried to do is I've got 8 players sort of packed onto this side of the pitch like I showed you in that screen grab, and then I've got Jedi and Adama Traore sort of isolated over on this left-hand side. So let's first of all look at what activating this right side for Fulham does in the first instance. Well, first of all, it pushes Garnacho back, so he's got to deal with Castagna. Iwobi engages Diogo Dalot, and then when Sasha Lukic starts to bomb on, and we've seen this in recent weeks, him running beyond the man, Lenny Yoro is going to have to come out and engage him, right? Lukic is too important a player. If you sit off him here and you give Lukic space to drive with the ball, Iwobi plays a team here, give him space to drive with the ball and create, really doesn't work. Yoro is going to have to be sort of proactive and come and engage with Lukic. He's probably, of United centre-backs, the best bet to come out and do that. You don't want the others to be doing it as much. But this does cause some problems. So first of all, let's look at what happens down the right-hand side. Well, you've got numbers here. They can play in combination. And we know that Raul is really good at sort of making these sort of channel runs. So he can sort of peel off and run down here and cause and give them an option to sort of hit behind. And if Yoro is engaged across, because he has to go out to Lukic, or even if they've done something slightly different, he has to come across and engage Iwobi. But let's just say Yoro's had to be proactive. You've got this gap here now for Raul to run into the channels. And the player he's going to run into the channels is Harry Maguire. Harry Maguire is having a bit of a renaissance, I think, for United, because he's sitting in that central centre-back role with 2 players outside of him, stopping him from being pulled out where he shouldn't be. Raul can now do this to Maguire on the right-hand side. So immediately, this setup, even just of the right-hand side, causes issues. Let's now take the ball over to the left-hand side and see what happens. So let's say we've switched it across, or we've somehow gone back and played it round across, and we're getting to Adama and to Robinson over here. Now, what will happen obviously is that their defence will try and reset. But if we've done it quick enough, let's just leave them as they are for now, just as an example. How do you defend this? So Anthony Robinson is probably among the best sort of surging runners in the Premier League. And normally you'd say, right, Mazraoui, you're our wing back. You're a bit quicker than the centre halves. Deal with Robinson. I don't want my centre half having to deal with Jedi at all here. But if Mazraoui's dealing with Robinson, then Adama's running at Matthias de Ligt, which from a Fulham perspective should be absolute heaven. Like de Ligt has got no business coming out here, no business jumping up. He's a solid centre half. I think he'd actually be better in Maguire's position in the middle of the park, to be honest. But he's going to have to play on the right, I'd imagine. These two are probably not in a great place to deal with that. I don't think that really suits. And then the other thing you've got is like how much help is Joshua Zirkzee going to give? Because Andreas Pereira as the 10 nominally is actually on this left-hand side. We've pulled him across because we've overloaded this side, but really he's running this channel. That's his job. That's the triangle. And then Calvin Bassey, we know, can sort of come in and become the fourth player there as Fulham work the ball back around. And suddenly, Manuel Ugarte is quite combative, so he can do a job on Andreas, or maybe he comes across and helps Adama get covered out here. But if he's doing that, then Andreas is running through the middle. And I just think that this whole left-hand side now that we've pulled numbers across, we've got really dangerous direct runners, Andreas, Adama, Robinson, Bassey, going at sort of a fairly immobile Manchester United backline. They don't have the defenders Crystal Palace did to sort of come and engage and deal with this. So I sort of think that having taken people across over to the right-hand side, use Alex Iwobi's playmaking skills to play out the back, actually this direct left-hand side now is a really, really sort of dangerous thing for Fulham to try and exploit. And look, we've had trouble breaking down back fives. I think when you play against back fives, you have to switch play. You have to try and pull people across and then get space on the other side. And I just think there's an activation point with these sort of four that could be really exciting. And Matthias de Ligt could have a pretty tricky time if that's what they're dealing with. On paper, this feels like the best way to get at them. And then just a reminder that you might be thinking, gosh, this is really aggressive. You've suddenly got Calvin Bassey coming up into this area here. But they don't really have a wide threat. Like if Robinson and Adama are doing a job and, if both of them are on that side, immediately if I'm Ruben Amorim, I'm like, Mazraoui, for the love of God, stay back here and help us a bit. If you've got Robinson and Adama pushing down here, who is the width that's going to really trouble Fulham going into this channel, right? Calvin Bassey is really good on the cover. He's quick, he's aggressive, he can follow Zirkzee. Is Manuel Ugarte going to make a massive overlapping run? Is Zirkzee suddenly going to become a winger? Like, I sort of feel like this is the place where they then now can take those risks and support the play and are quite well suited to not being massively challenged going the other way. Look, Ruben Amorim in a low block is pretty good. His team are capable of shutting games down by sitting off, by keeping the ball between the back three and sort of frustrating teams. But if Fulham are able to pull them around a bit, deal with the danger from Garnacho on the wing, and then give them something to think about the other way, I think the player quality in general is in our favour, which is kind of mad because they're still Man United. But we have better players in better form. We have more off the bench. If we can give them some structural challenges, I think that we can make life really difficult for them. Tactically in many ways, I think that this backline for United are much more like Nuno's backline in the five that we did a job on at the Cottage than they are Glasner's back five, who did a job on us. I think there are things that we can exploit here. And what I've shown is sort of a way in which we might do that. So that's how I see this one in terms of shape and matchups. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Marco Silva starts with the epitome of plan A, no changes whatsoever, Adama on the right. But just looking at the sort of way the two teams play and the likely lineup United are going to be forced into, I think there is really something in trying to get our most direct runners over on the left-hand side. I think it could be a really effective way of breaking them down. So I hope we see it at some point as we try and get over the line in this one. Look, I just hope it's a more exciting game than the last one we saw between these two, which was absolutely dire. I hope it's also not as exciting as our last FA Cup game at Old Trafford. I wasn't there for that one. I will be there for this one. And the last time I went to Old Trafford to watch Fulham, we got a win. Alex Iwobi at the end. An amazing, amazing away day. So, like I said, on paper, there is absolutely nothing that suggests Fulham can't win this. There's something at the back of my mind that is preparing me for probably undeserved heartache at the end. But, given where they sit in the table, United are even more all in on the cups than we are probably. So they should be up for this, and they can be pretty belligerent when they want to be. So look, who knows? I hope we get over the line. Safe travels to everyone going up to Manchester. If you are up there and you see me, come and say hi. I'll be with Sam from Fulham Focus. We'll probably attend the joint protest between both fans about ticket prices. So come and say hi if you see me around Old Trafford. And let's hope we will have something to cheer on the way home. Thanks very much for watching. Sorry it was a bit longer than expected, but those tactical boards, man, they get to me. And if you like the content, I'll be back with some more very, very soon.